a lot of the videos on the website are geared towards golfers who tend to overuse their body, or a term that I coined called hip spinners. And so what that typically looks like is a golfer, as he goes to the top of the swing, as he starts to drive really hard with his lower body, the heel comes up really quick, the hips get open really fast, and the arms and club head get trapped behind the body, and it leads to a very in to out swing path and tends to create big high blocks and snap hooks. Typically we find that in the lower handicap golfer who's learned to use his body a little bit better and tends to overdo it. Just like anything in life, you can have too much of a good thing. And so that right side pushing motion is a very, very powerful motion. So many of the videos on the website are geared towards calming that down, because a lot of the players that I work with tend to be, higher level or professional players. And so a lot of that stuff gets conveyed on the website. But of course we realize that's not everybody. There's a lot of golfers out there who aren't hip spinners. And so what you actually need to do is use some of that pushing power to help you get around and get your hips open. So the antithesis of the hip spinner is the golfer who goes to the top of the swing, doesn't use his lower body at all, and then looks kind of like the same he did at impact. The hips are dead square or sometimes even shut, when really they have to be open a little bit. Two ways to do that, of course. One is to pull with the left side, which you want to do. There's a lot of videos on the website talking about how to pull yourself over to this impact position to get into a posted position and to rotate your hips open. But of course, anytime you're dealing with rotation in the body, you're always going to use both sides. You're going to use pushing and pulling muscles, but typically what happens is most golfers don't feel the pushing motion. It's a very powerful, dominant motion, and so you don't really notice it. And so a lot of the stuff on the website is geared towards getting you to feel that less dominant pulling motion that moves you in towards center and keeps your joints in alignment and so on. But of course, if you tend to not get your hips open at all and you're trying to pull really hard with the left, you may actually want to start to use some pushing motion or start to focus on it to get your hips open coming into impact. Now, of course, you can quickly overdo this if you're, tend to learn how to pick things up really quick with your body and tend to be a little bit more athletic. You can start going from kind of this dead square impact position to all of a sudden getting your hips really ripped open, because this is a very powerful motion. This is kind of like putting gasoline on a fire for some golfers, because this is the last thing they need to focus on. But if you're the type of golfer who tends to be very square or even shut with your hips at impact, learning how to use your lower body for power is a critical thing. This is going to help you start to get some more power into your swing. But you got to be careful with it. Once you start to get this down, it's kind of addictive. You're going to start to want to really drive. But again, that's why I don't talk about pushing much on the website at all, because most golfers do it and they don't even realize it. They don't have a clue that they're doing it. They can't feel it. It's a very powerful motion that's very effortless for most golfers. So here's what you're wanting to feel. As you go to the top of your swing, what you want to do to practice this is go to the top and stop. And then what I want you to do is actively take your right leg and push it while you're pulling with the left as well, to get your weight back over to the left and start to get your hips open. Now again, it's only if you're not a hip spinner. If you're a hip spinner, this is death for you. You're already doing this, you just don't realize it. So from the face-on view, we're at the top, you're gonna stop, and then you're gonna take this right leg, you're gonna use both, and push to get your hips open. Now, my tendency is to be a hip spinner, and so for me, I tend to really do this really quick and easy and do it too much. So what you may feel like, though, if you're not used to doing this at all, what you may feel is that you're pushing really hard and you may only get this open. You want to try and get about 45 degrees open. Again, we're operating under the assumption that you don't get your hips open at all. So this is going to help you learn to get your hips open to help start the downswing. That's the big key. This is to help initiate everything going back in the other direction. So from the top, that's why it's important that you pause. So as you go to the top, stop so that you can relax your arms and your shoulders for a second, and then use your legs to start everything down. It's all you're feeling is using that right leg, the glute, the quad, everything to get everything started down, and then you release the club. So if you struggle with getting your hips open and you tend to be a really armsy swing, this is going to really help you to go to the top, stop, and really drive with your legs. Now, you may not need to feel a whole lot of this. It's always going to be a balance, because this is, like I said, this is a very powerful motion. It's like putting turbochargers on your golf swing. So use it just enough to get your hips just open enough so you're starting to learn to use balancing both sides, pushing and pulling, to help give you some power. Now, as one caveat to this, or an addition to this, when you really need to hit one hard, people ask me this all the time, this is where you're gonna get it. There's only gonna be so much you can use from one side. If you're really focusing on just pulling, you're taking out half of the benefit of being able to push, but of course you've gotta learn to control it. So, when you really wanna hit one hard, you can drive aggressively off the right side, but what you have to realize is that if you do that, everything else has to move faster as well. So your arms have to move faster, the club has to release faster, everything has to be able to catch up, otherwise you're just gonna end up in this stuck position. So practice with this on the range, start to get your hips open at impact. Just about 40 degrees is a great sweet spot for most people, and see that if you struggle to get into these tour player impact positions, how your impact positions change.